Today, I'm going to do a full project breakdown on this athletic brewing micro documentary I created a few years ago for their Two for the Trails program. Let's hop in. We're going to go through the initial pitch, pre production, production, post production, and the final deliverables. So, this project all started off when I got contacted by a friend to respond to an RFP that they put out. And they were looking for a roughly 2 minute to 3 minute video to showcase their Two for the Trails program. This is the initial pitch that I got from them. Pretty basic. They just wanted two plus social media campaign concepts that included three short form videos, a 6 second, a 15 second, a 30 second, and one long form video that was 2+ minutes with the criteria that it had to be under 3 minutes in total length. We ended up hopping on a Zoom call because the project brief that they sent over was pretty vague and I wanted to get more information before I created the proposal. After the Zoom call, I had enough information to create the proposal, and this is what I came up with. We had the director's vision, created this all in a PDF. The objectives of what they were looking for that I got both from their PDF and from the initial Zoom call that we had. I went over what the visual textures, how I wanted this video to look, some examples of how that was going to look right here, into the approach. Because they had a relatively small budget for this, we wanted to have a small and light approach, utilizing a small crew to maximize their dollar value for what they were getting. And because I'd already done a lot of very similar short form micro documentaries like this, I felt very confident that myself and one other filmmaker and a producer could get the whole project done. So went in it with that approach, and then kind of wrote out what my idea was for the script of this, which is basically just the outline going over their main talking points and how we were going to structure that into a coherent story. Reiterating the deliverables in this, just making sure we're on the same page before we even start the project. I know a few other people were bidding on this project, so I really wanted to make this entire proposal look really professional and get my ideas across of how we were going to do the project so they knew we had a plan going into it from the start. Crossed out the budget because I don't think they really want all of that showing. We ended up coming in a little bit above budget, so I wanted to break down what our plan was for what I thought we could do based on what they wanted and how much I thought that was realistically going to cost. Then I broke down what we could do within their three budget categories that they originally stated in this RFP, went over what the scope of work would look like, and then broke down the cost so they could really understand where all of that additional money would go, especially when you're coming in at above what they were originally requesting for the proposal. And that's overall what the PDF looked like. Sent that off. They loved it and ended up getting the job. So the next step was a project kickoff meeting that we had. We had the producer, myself, and three people from Athletic Brewing on this call. And that was really to get all of the information that I needed to start this project, see how involved they wanted to be, dial in the partners that they actually wanted to use and showcase in the project, the locations, and get all their contact info. The concept of the project was to highlight three different programs that were funded by Two for the Trails, their nonprofit, and they really wanted to show a variety of these different projects. So we picked one in Wisconsin, one in Florida, and one in San Diego. Before we could really jump into the project too far, we really needed to figure out who was going to be in it and what the story was. What was the story for each of those locations? So we ended up getting the main contacts for each of those organizations, which were the Ice Age Trail Alliance in Lodi, Wisconsin, Friends of Mayaca River in Sarasota, Florida, and the San Diego Mountain Biking Association in Escondido, California. So we got on the phone or got on Zoom calls with all of the main people that were heading up each of those organizations, and then got information from other volunteers that were working within those organizations and conducted a whole bunch of pre interviews to figure out what the actual story was for this piece. So after the pre interviews and we figured out what the story was, I created an overview PDF that went over the story outline, showed the style that we were going to shoot the project in, And this is all to get approval from the client and make sure we're on the same page before we actually jump into production and start setting up dates for, or start setting up flights and everything that we needed to do the actual shoot. This is what that overview PDF looked like. And this is what we got approval on before we started actually producing the film and setting up all of those logistics. So, reiterated the objective. It's a little more refined in this one. Went into the projects and characters that we were going to showcase. This was really difficult, and we knew it was going to be very tight because they had a max cutoff at a 3-minute micro documentary, when in reality, to showcase all of these and do them the most justice, it probably would have been a 10 to 15-minute piece at minimum. But I think it was at the time, Instagram only had like a 3-minute cap. So that was why we had the 3-minute cutoff for that. So we went over the story outline, and then we had keywords, which really just kept us focused on what the actual goal was for the project. So, inspiration keyword, novelty keyword, who the audience was, what we wanted the emotion to be, and what we wanted the action to be, or what was the goal of the entire project. Some interview questions that we were going to ask the different volunteers and people that were heading up these volunteer organizations. Some basic shot lists. And again, just reiterating the style of the regular shots we were going to do, the B roll shots, the interview shots, and the moments that we were just going to try to capture as they happened on the days that we were showcasing. And then we went into our approach again. After the overview was approved, we jumped into production, which was to film one day at each of the locations and then give each day an extra weather day just in case the weather wasn't cooperating. We originally planned to film in Wisconsin first, in Lodi, Wisconsin. This was originally supposed to be a snowy end of winter shoot where they basically got out all of the invasive species before they started growing. So they really wanted like a little bit of snow on the ground so they could burn all the invasive species. It ended up being too dry to do any burning, but they were still removing as much invasive species as they could along the Ice Age Trail. For each of the days, I created a call sheet that had all the locations and the plan for the day. It was going out to all of the key stakeholders, the crew, the client, and the main contact points at each of these organizations. So, sent that out to everybody the night before or a few days before. The call sheets had geolocations for all the locations. So, all you needed to do was open the email, click on that, and you could have Google Maps or Apple Maps get you to the location. On the first day, we ended up filming B roll drone shots early in the morning, an interview with Luke later on. Then we went out and filmed a day of all the volunteers working on the trails, interviewed a few other people that were part of the organization, and wrapped that day. Then we went to Florida. For this project, they were putting up trail markers in the backcountry to help lost hikers figure out where they were and to help them avoid getting lost in the first place. This one, we filmed a few interviews with the person that was heading it up and a few of their volunteers. And here are a few shots from that shoot. This is the small crew we had out there that day. And then a week or two later, we flew to San Diego and drove over to Escondido to work with the San Diego Mountain Biking Association to do a trail day with them and see them repairing one of the most heavily used trails that is in the area. Did a couple interviews with two of the volunteers and followed them around a day of trail work. And after the trail work was done, we filmed some trail running and some mountain biking to show the trails in use. That was one thing that we did for each of the shoots, was show both the trails getting worked on and the trails getting used. After everything was filmed, I hopped into post-production, and this is what I have as my post-production workflow. I originally created interview select, so I created a timeline with each of the individual interviews, raising up all of the best sound bites to track 2. So you can see all of the interviews for each of the individual people, raised all the best sound bites into track two, and then I created radio edits from that. I already had the outline for the story, so all I needed to do was find the sound bites that fit in with that story and lay them out in order. So you can see I have the soundbite selects, which are color coded per person, and then I have them laid out in order. And just to have a rough pacing, I do have a sample track that is basically just an audio track to edit to that will have roughly the same beat for the one that we're going to get composed later on. After the radio edit is approved and we have the story outline in just skeleton sound bites, then I go through and create the B-roll select. So for each location, I had a master timeline with all of the B-roll footage from that location. I go through, look at all of the footage, raise all of the best footage to track two, duplicate the timeline, delete all the unusable footage, lower it down, compress it, and that'll be my selects timeline. So you can see all the footage here goes into a selects timeline. And then I usually do this one more time. So I'll go through the selects timeline and pick out all of the best bits that I think are going to fit in with the story into a selects timeline too. And ideally, I can use just selects timeline two to have all of the footage to edit the final piece. And if I ever need to go back and find different clip or a different part of a clip, I don't have to go through all of the raw footage. I can just go back to selects timeline one to have a little more of the best clips, or even to the main master footage timeline and then just look around that same clip to see if maybe I cut off a little bit too early. But for the most part, just using selects timelines one and two to create all of the B-roll that goes over that radio edit. Once I have everything laid out on the timeline, the sound bites, the B-roll, it's all timed up to the reference track. Then I send it out to the composer. This is the person that's going to be making a custom track for this edit. This process consists of doing a full listen through the project with the composer, figuring out where we want the ups and downs and how we want it to sound and feel at different points. And you can see here we have a bunch of different layers of, or different versions of this, and little markers for notes, and the final track at the bottom. And I usually do most of my notes when we actually have full cuts in Vimeo Review Tools. And this is what I would send to clients, or in this case, I'm working with Evan, the editor or the composer, to fine tune the audio for this track. Once editing's complete, then it goes on to delivery. For this one, like I said earlier, we have the hero cut that's a 2 to 3 minute piece. I think this one is coming in at just under 3 minutes because I knew that was a hard cutoff. And that was to be used on the YouTube website and email. You can view it here. I'll have the link in the description below. And then we also created 3 cut downs for their social channels, which were a 30-second, a 15-second, and a 6-second vertical video. That is the whole project. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And I hope you found this helpful, informative, and overall just like a good reference to see what the process is to go from initial pitch to final deliverables. Peace.